The encounter at the corner cafe. Naomi Carter had seen a lot in her years as an undercover FBI agent. She'd infiltrated high-stakes syndicates, unraveled dark webs of corruption, and stood face-to-face with danger more times than she could count. But the mission she was currently on felt different, tighter, more personal. She wasn't sure if it was because she had been assigned to Sylvia Rodriguez, the owner of the corner cafe, or because something about this case felt unusually raw. The cafe, perched on the edge of downtown, buzzed with life. Baristas moved like clockwork behind the counter, blending drinks and frothing milk to a symphony of orders. College students hunched over laptops, typing furiously. Professionals in suits juggled business calls and cappuccinos. Naomi sat at a corner table, sipping her latte, her posture relaxed, but her senses razor-sharp. Dressed in a casual blazer, dark jeans, and white sneakers, she blended seamlessly into the crowd. Her tablet was open to a fabricated article draft, the perfect decoy for her cover as a freelance journalist profiling successful minority-owned businesses. The real reason she was here, however, was buried deep in encrypted files on the device. The FBI had long suspected Sylvia's cafe of being more than a local hotspot. It was believed to be a laundering hub for a powerful drug ring. Her job was clear: earn Sylvia's trust, collect evidence, and identify the players in the operation without blowing her cover. Today, Sylvia was her target, but Naomi couldn't shake the gnawing unease in her gut. It was the kind of tension that came before a storm. The door swung open with a gust of cold air. Naomi's instincts flared as a tall man in a police uniform entered, his presence rippling through the room. Conversations quieted, heads turned. Officer Mark Connors. Naomi recognized him immediately, not just by reputation, but from a joint task force meeting months prior. Connors was known for his aggressive approach to law enforcement, a bulldog in pursuit of justice, but often blind to nuance. He thrived on authority and carried himself like a man who rarely doubted his own conclusions. Connors scanned the room, his sharp eyes landing briefly on Naomi before moving on. She felt his gaze linger just a moment too long. She didn't flinch, keeping her expression neutral, but her heart quickened. Connors wasn't supposed to be here. From behind the counter, Sylvia appeared, her usual warm smile masking the hint of tension. "Afternoon, Officer Connors. Coffee's on the house, as always." "Thanks, Sylvia." Connors' tone was casual but loaded. "Not here for coffee today. Need to ask a few questions about some unusual activity." Naomi adjusted her posture, pretending to be engrossed in her work while straining to catch every word. Connors wasn't here on a whim. His body language screamed purpose. Sylvia's smile faltered but held as she wiped her hands on her apron. "Unusual activity. Should I be worried?" "Nothing serious yet," Connors replied, his gaze darting around the room. "Just routine checks. Mind if I talk to some of your customers?" Naomi knew where this was heading. She lowered her gaze, keeping her face calm. Connors' presence wasn't a coincidence. He was fishing, and Naomi couldn't afford to be the bait. Connors' boots clunked against the polished wooden floor as he approached her table. "Excuse me, miss." Naomi looked up, her expression calm, tinged with mild curiosity. "Yes, officer." "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Connors asked, his tone polite, but edged with authority. "Of course," Naomi said, folding her hands on the table. "Is something wrong?" "Not necessarily," Connors replied, pulling out a notepad. "Just doing some routine checks. What brings you here today?" Naomi smiled, leaning back slightly. "I'm a freelance journalist. I'm writing a feature on successful minority-owned businesses. Sylvia's Cafe came highly recommended." Connors studied her for a moment. "Journalist hot. Got any credentials on you?" "Of course." Naomi reached into her bag, pulling out a fabricated press pass. It was impeccable, down to the watermarked hologram. Connors scrutinized it before snapping a picture with his phone. He handed it back, but his expression remained skeptical. "Interesting name, Naomi Carter," he said, his tone neutral but probing. Seen anything unusual while you've been here?" "Nothing at all," Naomi replied smoothly. "This place seems pretty peaceful." Connors nodded, but Naomi could tell he wasn't convinced. He moved on, but his attention lingered on her as he exited the cafe, speaking into his radio. Naomi exhaled slowly, her pulse steadying. Connors wasn't done. She could feel it. Sylvia, who had resumed chatting with a customer, seemed more guarded than before. Her cheerful demeanor was intact, but there was a stiffness to her movements. Naomi decided it was time to make her move. She approached the counter with her tablet tucked under her arm. "Sylvia, do you have a moment? I'd love to hear more about how you started this place." Sylvia hesitated before her smile returned, though not as brightly as before. "Of course. Let's grab a seat." At a corner table, Sylvia spoke openly about her journey to open the cafe, her love for coffee, and the challenges she faced. Naomi skillfully wove her questions, probing gently for anything that might confirm her suspicions about the laundering operation. The more Sylvia spoke, the more Naomi sensed there was a guardedness beneath her words, a hesitation that hinted at deeper secrets. Out of the corner of her eye, Naomi noticed Connors lingering near the entrance, his gaze flicking toward their table. He wasn't leaving. Naomi's earpiece buzzed softly, a voice crackling to life. "Agent Carter, it's Williams. We've got a problem." Connors received a tip about the cafe being linked to illegal activity. He's looking for evidence. Naomi's grip tightened on her tablet, though her face remained calm. "Understood," she whispered, her eyes on Sylvia. Connors was circling too close, and Sylvia was visibly rattled. Naomi had to keep her cover intact while figuring out her next move. "Is everything all right?" Naomi asked, lowering her voice as she leaned forward. Sylvia's eyes flicked to Connors before returning to Naomi. "He's been here before," Sylvia said quietly, "always asking questions about my suppliers, my customers. It's like he's trying to pin something on me." Naomi nodded sympathetically. "If there's anything you want to share off the record, I can make sure your side of the story is heard." Sylvia hesitated, her expression conflicted. Before she could respond, Connors stepped outside, his phone pressed to his ear. Whatever he was planning, Naomi knew her time was running out. Sylvia wasn't just a cafe owner anymore. She was the linchpin to something much bigger, and Connors was a wild card Naomi hadn't accounted for. As Sylvia excused herself to check on a delivery, Naomi made a decision. The investigation was no longer just about collecting evidence. It was about protecting Sylvia and staying one step ahead of Connors. Whatever came next, Naomi would need every ounce of her training and a bit of luck to keep her mission from spiraling out of control. The unraveling. Naomi sat in silence, watching Sylvia retreat to the cafe's backroom. The clink of cups and low hum of conversation faded into the background as Naomi's mind raced. The presence of Officer Connors, unplanned and persistent, had shifted the dynamics of her mission. He wasn't a man who let things go easily. Naomi needed to act quickly before he made another move. Her earpiece buzzed again. Agent Williams's voice came through, calm but firm. "Carter, we have more intel. Connors is digging because he got an anonymous tip about the cafe's connection to laundering. We don't know who tipped him off, but it's credible. He's requesting backup." Naomi's pulse quickened, though her face remained calm. "Backup? What's his angle?" "Hard to say," Williams replied. "But he's not supposed to be there. His department hasn't coordinated with us. If he pushes too hard, he could spook Sylvia or worse, get her to destroy evidence." Naomi exhaled slowly, trying to mask her frustration. Connors' meddling threatened to blow months of undercover work. "Understood," she murmured. "I'll keep him in check." Her gaze drifted to the counter, where Sylvia's absence was starting to draw attention from the cafe's regulars. Naomi adjusted the strap on her shoulder bag, the weight of the tiny recording device inside a constant reminder of the delicate balance she needed to maintain. When Sylvia returned, her demeanor was composed, but Naomi could see the tension in her shoulders. Sylvia carried a tray of coffee cups for a group of college students at the far table, but her hands trembled slightly as she set them down. Whatever Connor's questions had stirred, Sylvia was rattled. Naomi decided to approach her again. Timing was everything, and she couldn't afford to wait for Connors to make the next move. She approached the counter, leaning against it casually. "Sylvia," she began, her voice soft. "I wanted to ask about something you said earlier. Can we talk for a moment?" Sylvia hesitated, then nodded. "Sure. Let's step to the back." The two women moved to the storeroom, away from prying eyes. The small space smelled faintly of coffee beans and cleaning supplies. Boxes were stacked neatly against the walls, and a cluttered desk sat in the corner. Sylvia leaned against the desk, her arms crossed, her expression guarded. "What's on your mind?" Sylvia asked, trying to sound nonchalant, but her voice betrayed her unease. Naomi leaned in slightly, her tone gentle but serious. "Sylvia, I think Connors is looking for something specific, and I think you know what it is." Sylvia's eyes darted away, her defenses raising. "I don't know what you mean. He's just fishing." "Maybe," Naomi replied, her voice calm. "But fishing trips like this usually lead somewhere. If there's anything you're not telling me, now is the time. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to help." Sylvia's posture stiffened. For a moment, she looked as though she might lash out or deny everything. But then her shoulders sagged, and she exhaled a shaky breath. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's not that simple." Naomi nodded, giving her the space to speak. "Help me understand." Sylvia hesitated, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "A few months ago, a man came to me. He said he wanted to help me expand the cafe. I was struggling, Naomi. I'd put everything I had into this place, and I was barely breaking even. His offer sounded like a godsend." Naomi's heart sank. She could see where this story was going, but she let Sylvia continue. "He offered me money, no strings attached, or so he said. But after I took it, things changed. He started sending people here, associates, he called them. They'd use the office for meetings, drop off packages, pick up envelopes. At first, I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know." Naomi kept her expression neutral, though the weight of Sylvia's words settled heavily in her chest. "And when did you realize what was happening?" Sylvia swallowed hard. "The first time I overheard them talking about shipments. They used coded language, but it wasn't hard to figure out. Drugs, Naomi. They're using my cafe to launder money for a drug ring." Naomi's mind raced as she absorbed the information. Sylvia was more deeply entangled than Naomi had anticipated. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Sylvia let out a bitter laugh. "The police, half of them are probably on Victor's payroll. And even if they weren't, do you think they'd believe me? A Latina business owner in this neighborhood. I'd be the first person they'd pin it on." Naomi nodded, understanding Sylvia's fear. "What about this Victor? Do you know who he is?" Sylvia shook her head. "I've never met him. He's just a name, a ghost. The people I deal with say he's the one running everything, but I don't even know if that's true. Do you have any records? Anything that could connect these people to the operation?" Sylvia hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There's a ledger. They made me keep track of the money that went in and out. It's in my office, hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk." Naomi felt a surge of adrenaline. The ledger could be the key to unraveling the entire operation. "We need to get it," she said firmly. Sylvia's eyes widened in fear. "What? No. If they find out I gave it to you." "They won't find out," Naomi interrupted. "But if we don't act now, Connors might find it first. And if he does, he won't protect you. He'll use it to build his case, and you'll be left to take the fall." Sylvia's face paled, her breathing quickening. Naomi placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Sylvia, I promise you, we'll protect you. But I need that ledger." Sylvia stared at her for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. "Okay. It's in the drawer under some files." Naomi nodded. Stay here. I'll get it. As Naomi turned to leave the storeroom, her earpiece buzzed again. Carter. Williams's voice came through. Connors is moving fast. He's calling for backup and might have a warrant soon. You need to wrap this up. Naomi cursed under her breath. Time was running out. She moved quickly but calmly, re-entering the main cafe. Connors was no longer in sight, but she knew he wouldn't stay gone for long. Sliding behind the counter, Naomi entered Sylvia's office. The small space was exactly as Sylvia had described. She closed the door behind her, locking it for good measure. Moving to the desk, she pulled open the bottom drawer. Beneath a stack of invoices and receipts, she found the ledger, the worn leather-bound book. Naomi flipped it open, scanning the entries. Names, dates, amounts, it was all there. This wasn't just evidence. It was a roadmap to the entire operation. The two women moved to the storeroom, away from prying eyes. The small space smelled faintly of coffee beans and cleaning supplies. Boxes were stacked neatly against the walls, and a cluttered desk sat in the corner. Sylvia leaned against the desk, her arms crossed, her expression guarded. "What's on your mind?" Sylvia asked, trying to sound nonchalant, but her voice betrayed her unease. Naomi leaned in slightly, her tone gentle but serious. "Sylvia, I think Connors is looking for something specific, and I think you know what it is." Sylvia's eyes darted away, her defenses raising. "I don't know what you mean. He's just fishing." "Maybe," Naomi replied, her voice calm. "But fishing trips like this usually lead somewhere. If there's anything you're not telling me, now is the time. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to help." Sylvia's posture stiffened. For a moment, she looked as though she might lash out or deny everything. But then her shoulders sagged, and she exhaled a shaky breath. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's not that simple." Naomi nodded, giving her the space to speak. "Help me understand." Sylvia hesitated, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "A few months ago, a man came to me. He said he wanted to help me expand the cafe. I was struggling, Naomi. I'd put everything I had into this place, and I was barely breaking even. His offer sounded like a godsend." Naomi's heart sank. She could see where this story was going, but she let Sylvia continue. "He offered me money, no strings attached, or so he said. But after I took it, things changed. He started sending people here, associates, he called them. They'd use the office for meetings, drop off packages, pick up envelopes. At first, I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know." Naomi kept her expression neutral, though the weight of Sylvia's words settled heavily in her chest. "And when did you realize what was happening?" Sylvia swallowed hard. "The first time I overheard them talking about shipments. They used coded language, but it wasn't hard to figure out. Drugs, Naomi. They're using my cafe to launder money for a drug ring." Naomi's mind raced as she absorbed the information. Sylvia was more deeply entangled than Naomi had anticipated. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Sylvia let out a bitter laugh. "The police, half of them are probably on Victor's payroll. And even if they weren't, do you think they'd believe me? A Latina business owner in this neighborhood. I'd be the first person they'd pin it on." Naomi nodded, understanding Sylvia's fear. "What about this Victor? Do you know who he is?" Sylvia shook her head. "I've never met him. He's just a name, a ghost. The people I deal with say he's the one running everything, but I don't even know if that's true. Do you have any records? Anything that could connect these people to the operation?" Sylvia hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There's a ledger. They made me keep track of the money that went in and out. It's in my office, hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk." Naomi felt a surge of adrenaline. The ledger could be the key to unraveling the entire operation. "We need to get it," she said firmly. Sylvia's eyes widened in fear. "What? No. If they find out I gave it to you." "They won't find out," Naomi interrupted. "But if we don't act now, Connors might find it first. And if he does, he won't protect you. He'll use it to build his case, and you'll be left to take the fall. Sylvia's face paled, her breathing quickening. Naomi placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Sylvia, I promise you, we'll protect you. But I need that ledger. Sylvia stared at her for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. Okay. It's in the drawer under some files. Naomi nodded. Stay here. I'll get it. As Naomi turned to leave the storeroom, her earpiece buzzed again. Carter. Williams's voice came through. Connors is moving fast. He's calling for backup and might have a warrant soon. You need to wrap this up. Naomi cursed under her breath. Time was running out. She moved quickly but calmly, re-entering the main cafe. Connors was no longer in sight, but she knew he wouldn't stay gone for long. Sliding behind the counter, Naomi entered Sylvia's office. The small space was exactly as Sylvia had described. She closed the door behind her, locking it for good measure. Moving to the desk, she pulled open the bottom drawer. Beneath a stack of invoices and receipts, she found the ledger, the worn leather-bound book. Naomi flipped it open, scanning the entries. Names, dates, amounts, it was all there. This wasn't just evidence. It was a roadmap to the entire operation. Her earpiece buzzed again. Carter, Williams said, you've got 2 squad cars tailing you from a distance. They haven't engaged yet, but they're tracking your route. Naomi looked at Ramirez. We've got tails. I see them, Ramirez replied, his tone steady. He took a sudden right turn down a side street, then another sharp left into an underground parking structure. The SUV screeched to a halt in a dimly lit corner, shielded from view by concrete pillars. Naomi turned to Sylvia. Stay quiet and stay low. The hum of engines echoed through the parking structure as the squad cars pulled in. Ramirez killed the SUV's lights, plunging them into darkness. Naomi reached for her bag, pulling out a compact firearm and checking the safety. Sylvia's eyes widened, but Naomi shook her head. Just a precaution. The squad cars idled for a moment before one of them moved deeper into the structure, its headlights sweeping across the rows of parked vehicles. Naomi held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The second squad car remained at the entrance, blocking their exit. We're boxed in, Ramirez murmured. Naomi's mind raced. She needed to create a diversion, something to draw the officers away without blowing their cover. Her gaze fell on a maintenance door near the far corner of the garage. An idea began to form. Stay here, she told Ramirez and Sylvia. I'll draw them off. What? No, Sylvia whispered fiercely. You can't go out there alone. I've done worse, Naomi replied with a faint smile. Trust me. Without waiting for further protest, Naomi slipped out of the SUV, her movements silent and precise. She crept along the shadows, her eyes locked on the maintenance door. Reaching it, she slipped inside and found herself in a utility corridor. Pipes lined the walls, and the air was damp and cold. She pulled out her phone and dialed a burner number connected to a preset audio loop, a recording designed to mimic the sound of footsteps and voices. Setting the phone on a timer, she placed it near a vent that amplified the sound and then slipped back into the parking structure. Within moments, the squad car near the entrance began to move, its headlights sweeping toward the source of the noise. The second squad car joined in, both vehicles converging on the far corner of the garage. Naomi sprinted back to the SUV, her movements swift and silent. She slid into the back seat and nodded to Ramirez. Go, now. Ramirez started the engine, and the SUV rolled out of the parking structure just as the squad cars reached the opposite end. They emerged onto the street, blending seamlessly into traffic. Naomi exhaled slowly, her tension easing as they put more distance between themselves and Connors. Sylvia looked at her, her expression a mix of awe and disbelief. How did you? Naomi smiled faintly. Training. Ramirez spoke up. We've got about 15 minutes before they figure out we slipped them. Safe house is 10 minutes out. Naomi nodded. Good. Sylvia, we're almost there. Once we're safe, we'll talk about the next steps. Sylvia nodded, though her hands were still trembling. Naomi reached into her bag and pulled out the ledger, flipping through the pages once more. The names and transactions were damning, but there were pieces missing, links that could tie everything together. We're not done yet, Naomi murmured to herself. She knew the escape was just the beginning. The real battle was still ahead, and it would take everything she had to dismantle the network and protect Sylvia from the fallout. As the SUV sped through the city, Naomi's mind sharpened, her determination hardening. Connors was relentless, and the criminals behind the operation wouldn't go down without a fight. But Naomi had faced worse odds before, and she wasn't about to back down. The mission was far from over. The safe house secrets. The SUV rolled to a stop outside a nondescript building in the heart of the industrial district. The location was deliberately unremarkable, blending seamlessly into the gray sprawl of warehouses and abandoned factories. Ramirez killed the engine and glanced at Naomi through the rearview mirror. This is it. No signs of pursuit, but Connors won't stay off our trail for long. Naomi nodded. Good work. Let's get inside. Sylvia hesitated as she stepped out of the vehicle, her wide eyes scanning the deserted street. This is your safe house? She asked, clutching her bag tightly. It's more secure than it looks, Naomi replied, guiding her toward the building's side entrance. Ramirez led the way, unlocking the steel door with a code and a biometric scanner. The door opened with a faint hiss, revealing a dimly lit hallway lined with reinforced walls and surveillance cameras. Inside, the atmosphere was clinical and quiet, the air cool and faintly metallic. Sylvia's unease was palpable as she followed Naomi and Ramirez deeper into the building, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. They reached a small but well-equipped operations room, where a team of agents was already at work, monitoring live feeds and analyzing data. Agent Carter, a tall man in a tactical vest, greeted her. It was Agent Williams, her handler. His sharp eyes flicked to Sylvia, assessing her with professional detachment. This is our key witness. Naomi nodded. Sylvia Rodriguez, cafe owner and reluctant participant in a laundering operation. She's provided valuable intel, including this. She handed Williams the leather-bound ledger. Williams opened the ledger, his expression hardening as he scanned the pages. This is solid, he said, flipping through the handwritten entries. Names, transactions. It's a direct link to the operation. But it's not enough to take down the network. I figured as much, Naomi said. Sylvia mentioned a man named Enrique, one of the higher-ups. She also referenced a warehouse in the industrial district where shipments are processed. Williams's brows furrowed. A warehouse? Did she give specifics? Not yet, Naomi replied, her gaze shifting to Sylvia. The cafe owner was standing near the wall, looking small and out of place in the high-tech room. Naomi approached her, her voice soft but firm. Sylvia, we need more information about this warehouse. Anything you can remember. An address, a description, anything. Sylvia hesitated, her fear evident. I don't know exactly where it is, she said, wringing her hands. But Enrique mentioned it once. He said it was near the old rail yard, something about using the tracks for deliveries. Naomi nodded, filing the information away. That helps. Anything else? Sylvia bit her lip, her eyes darting nervously around the room. There's something else, she said finally. I didn't want to say it before, but Victor, whoever he really is, has people everywhere. Not just in the operation, but in law enforcement, city officials, even the courts. If they find out I talked to you. Her voice trailed off, and she shuddered. Naomi placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're under our protection now. We won't let anything happen to you. Sylvia nodded, though her fear remained. Naomi turned back to Williams. We need to move on this warehouse. If it's a hub for their operation, it could lead us to Victor, or whoever's at the top. Williams frowned. It's a gamble. If we hit the warehouse without solid intel, we could spook the entire network. But if we wait too long, they might move everything and cover their tracks. Naomi folded her arms, her mind racing. What about Connors? He's already circling. If he stumbles onto the warehouse before we do, this whole thing could blow up. Williams sighed, rubbing his temples. Connors is a wild card. We intercepted his chatter. He's convinced the cafe is at the center of the operation. He'll be back there with a warrant soon. But without the ledger, he's got nothing. Naomi shook her head. He's persistent. If he doesn't find what he's looking for, he'll keep digging. Williams's expression darkened. If he gets too close, we may have to bring him in. Not yet, Naomi said firmly. If we neutralize Connors, it could draw attention to Sylvia. Let me handle him. Williams hesitated, then nodded. All right, but if he becomes a liability, we'll step in. Naomi returned to Sylvia, who was now sitting in a corner chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Sylvia, Naomi said gently, kneeling in front of her, you've already helped us more than you know. But there's one more thing I need to ask. Sylvia looked at her warily. What is it? Enrique. Naomi said, if he's one of Victor's key players, we need to find him. Do you have any idea where he might be? Sylvia hesitated, her fear warring with her resolve. He used to come to the cafe every week, always on the same day. But recently, he stopped coming. I think he's moved to overseeing the warehouse. Naomi nodded, her suspicions confirmed. Then that's where we'll find him. Sylvia's eyes widened. You're going to the warehouse. Isn't that dangerous? Naomi smiled faintly. Danger comes with the job. But if we can take down Enrique and secure the evidence at the warehouse, we can end this. Sylvia looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll tell you everything I know. As Sylvia began recounting every detail she could remember about Enrique and the operation, Naomi felt a renewed sense of determination. The safe house was a temporary haven, but the mission was far from over. The pieces were falling into place, and the next move was critical. Naomi glanced at Williams, who was already coordinating with the team to prepare for the raid. Her earpiece buzzed with updates from the surveillance team monitoring Connors' movements. Time was running out, but Naomi knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let this operation slip through her fingers. The clock was ticking, and the shadows were closing in. But Naomi was ready to face whatever came next. The warehouse raid. The industrial district at night was a maze of silence and shadows. The clatter of distant trains and the hum of machinery were the only sounds as Naomi and her team prepared to breach the warehouse Sylvia had described. From the outside, it looked like any other decaying structure, a sprawling building with rusted metal siding, its windows long since shattered. But the surveillance team's intel painted a different picture. Inside was a nerve center for the operation, a hub where shipments were processed, money was laundered, and orders were distributed to Victor's network. Naomi stood near a cluster of tactical vehicles, her Kevlar vest snug against her chest and her headset crackling with updates. Sylvia's tip about the warehouse's proximity to the rail yard had been spot on, and aerial drones confirmed the presence of armed guards patrolling the perimeter. The stakes had never been higher. Williams approached her, his face illuminated by the glow of a tablet displaying the warehouse's floor plan. We've got confirmation of multiple heat signatures inside, he said. Guards on every entrance, and at least 24 workers in the main processing area. Naomi nodded, her eyes scanning the layout. Any sign of Enrique? Not yet, Williams replied. But if he's overseeing operations, he'll be inside. Our best bet is to hit fast and hard before they have time to react. Naomi tightened the strap on her tactical gloves. We can't let this operation get away. If Enrique escapes, Victor will know we're onto them. Williams studied her for a moment, then gave a curt nod. You lead the breach team. Ramirez will cover the rear exit to cut off anyone trying to flee. Naomi didn't need to be told twice. She turned to the team assembled behind her. 8 agents in tactical gear, their faces a mix of grim determination and focus. "This is a precision operation," she said, her voice steady. "We're going in to secure evidence and detain targets. No unnecessary risks, and watch each other's backs. Let's move." The team split into 2 groups, one heading toward the warehouse's front entrance, and the other circling to cover the rear. Naomi led the front team, her heart pounding in anticipation. Every step brought them closer to the sprawling building, its hulking silhouette looming against the night sky. Naomi raised a fist, signaling the team to halt. They crouched in the shadows near the main entrance, a heavy metal door guarded by 2 men armed with rifles. The guards were alert, their eyes sweeping the area, but they didn't see Naomi's team moving silently into position. 2 guards at the front. Naomi whispered into her headset, "On my mark." The crackle of acknowledgement came through, and Naomi raised her hand. In unison, 2 agents fired suppressed darts, each finding its mark. The guards crumpled soundlessly to the ground, and the team moved forward. Naomi pressed her back against the cold metal of the door, her fingers gripping the handle. "Williams, we're breaching," she said. "Copy that," Williams replied. "Rear team in position." Naomi gave the signal, and one of the agents placed a small charge on the door. With a muffled pop, the lock gave way, and the team surged inside, their movements swift and calculated. The interior of the warehouse was a stark contrast to its dilapidated exterior. Bright fluorescent lights illuminated rows of conveyor belts, crates, and stacks of cash bundled in plastic. Workers froze in place, their faces a mix of confusion and terror. "FBI!" Naomi shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Hands in the air. Nobody move." The room erupted into motion as guards rushed to respond. Shots rang out, and Naomi dove behind a stack of crates, her gun drawn. "Engage hostiles," she barked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. The team returned fire with precision, taking down the armed guards one by one. Naomi peeked around the corner, her sharp eyes scanning for movement. A guard emerged from a side hallway, his weapon raised. Naomi fired, her shot hitting its mark. The man fell, his rifle clattering to the ground. "Carter, we got movement in the East Wing." Williams's voice crackled through her headset. "Possibly Enrique." Naomi's pulse quickened. "On it. Ramirez, hold the perimeter. No one gets out." She signaled 2 agents to follow her as she moved toward the East Wing. The sound of gunfire and shouting echoed through the cavernous space as they advanced. Naomi's every step was measured, her senses heightened. She reached a heavy metal door marked private and gestured for the agents to flank it. "Enrique could be inside," she whispered. "On my count." The agents nodded, their weapons trained on the door. Naomi counted silently in her head. 3, 2, 1, before kicking the door open. The room beyond was a makeshift office, cluttered with maps, ledgers, and monitors displaying surveillance feeds. And standing in the center of the room was Enrique. The man was in his early 40s, his hair slicked back, his suit tailored and pristine despite the chaos unfolding around him. He raised his hand slowly, a smirk playing on his lips. "Ah, Agent Carter," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Naomi's gun remained trained on him as she stepped forward, hands where I can see them. "You're under arrest." Enrique chuckled, his composure unshaken. "Do you really think taking me in will stop this operation? I'm just one piece of the puzzle. Victor will rebuild faster than you can tear it down." Naomi's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." One of the agents moved to cuff Enrique, but the smirk on his face gave Naomi pause. "Wait," she shouted. It was too late. Enrique moved with lightning speed, pulling a small device from his pocket and slamming it against the nearest monitor. The screen flickered, and a cascade of data began to erase itself. "No." Naomi lunged forward, grabbing Enrique and slamming him against the wall. The other agents scrambled to disconnect the monitors, but the damage was done. Enrique laughed, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. "You'll never find Victor," he said, his voice rasping. "And even if you do, you'll never stop him." Naomi ignored his taunts, pulling him upright. "We'll see about that," she said coldly. "Secure him and sweep the office. I want every piece of evidence that's still intact." As the agents dragged Enrique away, Naomi turned her attention to the wreckage. The monitors were useless, but the desk was littered with papers and ledgers. She began sifting through them, her sharp eyes scanning for anything that might point to Victor's identity. Her earpiece buzzed. It was Williams. "Carter, we've secured the main floor. Multiple detainees and significant evidence. No casualties on our side." Naomi allowed herself a brief moment of relief. "Good. We've got Enrique in custody, but he wiped most of the digital files. I'm combing through the hard copies now." "Copy that," Williams said. "Wrap it up quickly. Condors's team is mobilizing. They've got wind of the raid." Naomi clenched her jaw. Connors's interference was the last thing they needed. She grabbed the remaining papers and stuffed them into her bag. "Understood. We're moving out." As the team began their extraction, Naomi couldn't shake the weight of Enrique's words. Victor was still out there, a shadowy figure pulling the strings of a vast criminal empire. Taking down the warehouse was a victory, but it was just the beginning. Naomi knew the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the tactical vehicle sped away into the night, Naomi stared out the window, her mind already working on the next step. Victor's web was vast and tangled, but Naomi wasn't one to back down from a challenge. If Victor thought he could stay hidden, he had no idea who he was dealing with. The final confrontation. The safe house was silent except for the faint hum of the monitors displaying live feeds from the FBI's central database. Naomi sat at the metal table in the interrogation room, her eyes locked on Enrique. The man sat across from her, his hands cuffed to the table, his smirk a shadow of its former self. He was still confident, but Naomi could see the cracks forming in his composure. Outside the room, Williams and Ramirez watched through a one-way mirror, their postures tense. The operation at the warehouse had been a success in some ways. A dozen arrests, stacks of cash, and crates of contraband secured. But it wasn't enough. Victor remained an enigma, and Enrique's smug demeanor suggested he knew more than he was letting on. Naomi leaned forward, her voice calm but edged with steel. "You know how this works, Enrique. Cooperation gets you leniency. Stonewalling gets you nowhere." Enrique chuckled, shaking his head. "You think you can scare me, Agent Carter? You're just another cog in the machine. Victor is untouchable. He's been ahead of you from the start." Naomi's expression didn't waver. "Maybe. But he made one mistake. You." The smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, and Naomi seized on the moment. "You think Victor cares about you. You're expendable, Enrique. A pawn. He sent you to manage that warehouse, knowing it was vulnerable. And now here you are, sitting in front of me while he's sipping champagne in some penthouse." Enrique's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Naomi continued, her voice softer now, almost sympathetic. "But you don't have to go down with him. Give us something, anything, and I'll make sure you're protected. Witness protection, new identity, the works. You can walk away from all of this." For a moment, it looked like Enrique might crack. His eyes flickered with uncertainty, and his hands clenched against the table. But then he leaned back, his smirk returning. "You don't get it, do you? Even if I wanted to help you, Victor would find me. He'd find all of us. He doesn't need to care about me to make sure I don't talk." Naomi exhaled slowly, suppressing her frustration. Enrique was afraid, but he was also loyal, or at least resigned to his fate. She needed to change tactics. Rising from her seat, she stepped out of the room and joined Williams and Ramirez in the observation area. "He's stalling," Naomi said, crossing her arms. "But he's scared. Victor has him convinced that talking is a death sentence. Williams nodded. We could lean on him harder, but if we push too much, he might shut down completely. Naomi's mind raced. They needed leverage, something to break through Enrique's defenses. Her gaze shifted to the papers they had recovered from the warehouse, now spread out on the table behind them. Maps, ledgers, transaction logs, and a single photograph that caught her attention. "Who's this?" she asked, picking up the photograph. It showed Enrique with another man, both standing in front of what appeared to be a luxurious yacht. The man beside Enrique was older, with sharp features and a confident smile. Ramirez glanced over her shoulder. "That's Santiago Reyes. He's a known associate of Victor's. Big-time money launderer. He's been under surveillance for years, but we've never had enough to bring him in." Naomi's eyes narrowed as an idea began to form. If Enrique won't talk, maybe we use someone who will. Williams raised an eyebrow. "Reyes?" "Exactly," Naomi said. "If we can locate Reyes, he might be the key to unraveling this network. And if Enrique knows we're closing in on Reyes, it might make him more cooperative." Williams considered this for a moment, then nodded. "We'll need to move fast. Reyes is slippery, and if he gets word of the raid on the warehouse, he'll go underground." Naomi turned to Ramirez. "Get a team on Reyes's last known locations. I want eyes on him within the hour." As Ramirez left to coordinate, Naomi returned to the interrogation room. Enrique looked up as she entered, his smirk fading slightly at the determined look in her eyes. "I just spoke to my team," Naomi said, sitting down across from him. "We've identified Santiago Reyes. We know he's one of Victor's key players, and we're closing in on him as we speak." Enrique's expression remained neutral, but Naomi caught the flicker of recognition in his eyes. She pressed on. "If Reyes talks before you do, you lose your bargaining chip. Once we have him, we won't need you anymore." For the first time, Enrique looked genuinely uneasy. He shifted in his chair, his hands clenching the edges of the table. "Reyes won't talk," he muttered, almost to himself. Naomi leaned forward, her voice low and deliberate. "You sure about that? Because if there's one thing I know, it's that everyone talks eventually. The only question is who talks first." Enrique's jaw tightened, and Naomi could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was calculating the risks, weighing his loyalty to Victor against his own survival. Finally, he exhaled sharply and leaned forward. "There's a safe house," he said quietly. "Reyes uses it to meet with Victor's inner circle. It's in the West End, near the docks." Naomi's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "Address." Enrique hesitated, then rattled off a location. Naomi nodded, rising from her seat. "Thank you, Enrique. You just made things a lot easier for yourself." Outside the room, Williams was already on his phone, coordinating the raid on the safe house. Ramirez returned with an update. "We've got confirmation of movement at the West End location. Reyes is there, and we're tracking multiple vehicles entering the property." Naomi grabbed her gear, her adrenaline spiking. "Let's move." The raid on the safe house was swift and decisive. Reyes was caught off guard, his security detail overwhelmed by the FBI's tactical team. As Naomi cuffed him herself, she couldn't help but notice the fear in his eyes, a stark contrast to Enrique's defiance. Back at the safe house, the interrogation began. Reyes, unlike Enrique, cracked under pressure, providing crucial details about Victor's operations. Names, locations, codes, it was the breakthrough Naomi had been waiting for. By the end of the night, Naomi stood in the operations room, staring at a map dotted with the network Victor had built. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time, she could see a path to bringing him down. Williams approached her, his expression grim but satisfied. "Reyes gave us everything we need to dismantle this operation. Victor's days are numbered." Naomi nodded, her resolve hardening. "He might think he's untouchable, but no one is. We'll find him." As the first rays of dawn broke over the city, Naomi knew the fight wasn't over. Victor was still out there, and the web she had begun to unravel was vast and complex. But she also knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't stop until she brought him to justice. The hunt for Victor. The interrogation with Rice had been fruitful, but Naomi knew they were only scratching the surface of Victor's sprawling empire. The map in the operations room was now littered with markers, safe houses, laundering hubs, smuggling routes, but one location stood out: a heavily fortified compound in the outskirts of the city, marked as Victor's possible headquarters. Rice said Victor uses this compound as a fallback. Williams said, pointing to the map, "He won't stay there long once he knows we've taken down his network." Naomi's eyes narrowed. "Then we don't wait. We hit him before he has the chance to disappear." Williams hesitated, his jaw tightening. "It won't be easy. The compound is a fortress, multiple layers of security, surveillance, and armed guards. We'll need every resource we've got to breach it." "We've come this far," Naomi replied, her voice steady. "We can't let him slip away." Williams nodded, his expression resolute. "All right. I'll coordinate with SWAT and get tactical support on standby. Ramirez will lead the perimeter team. You'll head the breach." Naomi felt a surge of determination. "Let's bring him in." The final breach. The convoy moved through the darkened streets like a phantom, silent and focused. Tactical vehicles carried heavily armed agents, their faces grim with the weight of the mission ahead. Naomi sat in the lead vehicle, her Kevlar vest snug, her weapon loaded and ready. The compound loomed in the distance, its high walls and watchtowers silhouetted against the night sky. As they approached, Naomi's earpiece buzzed with updates. Drones had confirmed the presence of armed guards patrolling the perimeter and a fleet of vehicles inside the compound, likely Victor's personal convoy. "This is it," Naomi said into her mic. "We move fast, neutralize resistance, and secure Victor. No mistakes." The team responded with curt acknowledgments, their focus unwavering. Naomi signaled for the vehicles to stop just outside the compound's sensor range. The teams disembarked, moving swiftly into position under the cover of darkness. Naomi crouched behind a cluster of bushes, her sharp eyes scanning the compound's defenses. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, and guards with automatic rifles. Victor hadn't left anything to chance, but neither had Naomi. "Ramirez, take out the cameras on the east wall," Naomi whispered into her mic. "Williams, prepare the EMP drone to disable their comms. We go in once the lights are out." Within moments, the cameras flickered and went dark, and the compound's lights cut out as the EMP drone sent a pulse through the electrical grid. Shouts echoed from inside as the guards scrambled in confusion. "Go," Naomi ordered. The breach team moved with military precision, scaling the walls and neutralizing guards with suppressed weapons. Naomi led the charge, her movements swift and calculated. They reached the main building, a towering structure with reinforced steel doors. "Breaching," Naomi said, setting a small charge. The explosion was contained but powerful enough to blow the doors inward. The team stormed inside, weapons raised. The interior was lavish yet cold, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding outside. Naomi's eyes darted across the room, taking in the marble floors, expensive artwork, and ornate furniture. This wasn't just a compound, it was Victor's palace. Footsteps echoed from a side hallway, and Naomi signaled for her team to hold position. A group of armed men rounded the corner, opening fire. Naomi dove behind a pillar, returning fire with precision. Her team moved in sync, taking down the guards in a matter of seconds. "Clear," Ramirez said, his voice steady. Naomi nodded, her adrenaline pumping. "Victor's here. He won't leave without a fight." Face to face with Victor, they reached the top floor of the building, where a pair of heavy oak doors marked the entrance to Victor's office. Naomi kicked the doors open, her weapon trained on the figure standing inside. Victor was everything she had expected. A man in his 50s with sharp features, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. He stood behind a massive desk, his expression calm despite the chaos outside. "Agent Carter," Victor said, his voice smooth and calculated. "I've heard a lot about you." Naomi didn't lower her weapon. "Then you know why I'm here." "It's over, Victor. Your network is gone. Your people are in custody. And this compound is surrounded. Surrender now." Victor smiled faintly, clasping his hands behind his back. "You think arresting me will change anything? Do you have any idea how many people depend on what I've built? How many lives will be destroyed if you take me down?" Naomi's eyes narrowed. "Spare me the speech. You don't care about anyone but yourself." Victor's expression darkened, his calm demeanor slipping. "You're naive, Agent Carter. Cut off the head, and another will grow. You're fighting a battle you can't win." Naomi stepped forward, her weapon unwavering. "Maybe, but I'll make sure you don't get another chance to hurt anyone." Victor's hand moved subtly toward a drawer in his desk, and Naomi reacted instantly. "Don't," she barked. He froze, then slowly raised his hands. "All right, Agent, you win. Move away from the desk," Naomi ordered. "Hands on your head." Victor complied, but as Naomi cuffed him, she couldn't shake the feeling that he had one final card to play. As her team secured the office and began combing through documents and hard drives, she noticed Victor watching her with a knowing smirk. "You'll see, Agent Carter," he said cryptically as he was led away. "This isn't the end." Wrapping up. Hours later, Naomi stood in the operations room, staring at the evidence they had recovered. The compound servers had yielded a treasure trove of data, transaction records, communication logs, and encrypted files that would take weeks to decode. Victor's empire was crumbling, but his words lingered in Naomi's mind. "This isn't the end." Williams approached her, holding a cup of coffee. "You did it, Carter. Victor's in custody, and the network is falling apart. You should be proud." Naomi nodded, but her expression was distant. "It's a step forward. But Victor's right. Someone will try to take his place. This fight isn't over." Williams placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Maybe not, but thanks to you, we've dealt a major blow. Take the win, Naomi. You've earned it." Naomi exhaled slowly, allowing herself a moment of relief. The mission had been grueling, but it was a victory nonetheless. As she looked at the map of the dismantled network, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight against corruption and crime would never end, but neither would her resolve. As dawn broke over the city, Naomi left the operations room, her mind already turning to the next challenge. Victor might have been the face of the operation, but the shadows were still full of threats, and Naomi Carter wasn't done fighting. Not by a long shot.